here, okay? So the basic trick here is, okay, I'm just going to do 10 million, no, you know what, it works better if I do a crazy number with digits for everything, so. Okay, okay, crazy numbers work really well for illustrating this point, okay? So, are you ready? Here's the trick. So the trick is, we're labeling each column by place value, but we're labeling them in kanji to help you keep track of it, okay? So this is the ones column, so you call it ichi, okay? This is the tens column, right? So you call it ju. This is the hundreds column, call it hyaku. In kanji, makes it work better. Okay, this is the sen column, right? Here's the mon column. Then after mon, you start over from ju, okay? Because mon is where everything shifts, so it's like ichi in that respect. So you go back to ju again, and then hyaku again, and then sen again. Does that make sense?
I was doing that, but well, not exactly that, but I would just cover up the first, the first 5 numbers.
Okay, and go from there. Okay. Well, what's cool about doing it this way is then if you've got it written down below each digit, you can actually read it in like vertical columns in order to get how to actually say this huge number. So you can actually read Kyusen 800 76万 5432. You see how that worked? Okay. And then what you can do is wherever there's a 0, you just don't apply that number. The exception being that you have to say your mon if you've got any digits over here, even if it's only one of them. Okay? So like if you have, for example, let me use what's over here as an example. You've got 57 million, right? So this 5 is which column? It's the senmon column, right? And I'm going to do this in a different color so that you can see what we're doing too. So this is the senmon column and this is the hyakuman column, right? And this would be the ju and this would be the mon, and this would be the sen again and the hyaku again and the ju and the ichi, right? And of course it's much easier if you do it in reverse order so that you're working from ichi, ju, hyaku, sen, mon. It's much easier doing it in that order. So if you do that underneath, then you can easily say this is go, sen, nana, hyaku, right? Go, sen, nana, hyaku, mon, en. You see how that worked? You have to say the go, sen, and the nana, hyaku, and then you can skip everything until you get to that mon, because you need the mon to indicate that it's from here, not from here, right? Because it's not this sen and this hyaku, it's this sen and this hyaku, right? So you have to say the mon to indicate that it's the larger half, not the smaller half, right? But do you see how that works? So, go sen nani hyaku manen. Perfect. Okay? Let's do another one that's kind of like that. So this one is, again, if you do ichi, ju, hyaku, sen, mon, ju, mon, right? So do the ju and the mon, and this is hyaku, right? So you've got san, byaku, niju, mon, en. Good? Okay, over here, same kind of deal. You know, ichi, ju, hyaku, sen. Do the sen, and then the mon, and the jumon, right? So, ju, roku, mon, hasenen, right? And you can see ichi doesn't usually get put in front of the ju, right? You don't have to say ichi-ju to mean 10, you just say ju to mean 10, right? So if, like the teens, let's say you've got the number 16, you don't have to say ichi-ju roku, right? You just say juroku, normally, right? And the same thing is true for like 165, for example, and for 1005, for example. So this would be hyaku rokujugo, right? And this would be sen go, right? You don't say the ichi in front of ju or hyaku or sen. For whatever strange reason, you don't put the ichi in front of any of those, but you do put it in front of mon. So if you've got like 10,000 straight, you don't just say mon, you say ichiman. Why you say it on that one and not on the other three, I couldn't tell you. It's habit. It's just the convention. Okay? So, having gone through a few of these like that, Jamie, do you now feel like you'll be able to do one of those?
I think I have it.
Okay.
Do you want me to write it out?
Go ahead and write it up.
Okay.
Which-
Can I fix one?
Okay.
I messed up.
Okay, you want to fix it now that you figured it out?
Well, it's more like I just kind of read it and wrote it, and then I reread it.
Okay.
So now I messed
While
up.
you're fixing it, Paul, you want to come up and do number 10?
I'm just gonna rewrite this.
Figure that one out? You want-
I'll let you read
I
it.
figured you guys would.
Yeah, that's what happens when you're the last one here. You get the one that nobody else wants.
Are the commas?
I got the smallest one that was open.
Yes,
Oh,
okay.
They're the same.
Just for the, for everyone to hear, the question was, are the commas typically used? And the answer is yes, but not always at the threes, the way they are in English. Some Japanese people like to do the commas at the fours instead, because that coincides with the mon placement.
I noticed that, and I was like,
Yeah.
it doesn't fit with all of the comments in English.
Yeah,
And that's
so,
always threw me off.
so it can be confusing if you're converting from one language to the other, but on the other hand, if you're just thinking about it in Japanese, it kind of makes sense to put the comma where the mon place is. You know what I'm saying? So if you're dealing with I mean, it looks crazy, right, because we're not used to it, but that would be, well, actually, no, this would be going to another level that we're not doing yet, right? But this would be the equivalent of those are the same number, right? So if you're looking at it this way, hasen man hasen, it's easier to see that that's what it is. It's the same number, hasen man hasen, right? But can you see why it's easier to see it this way?
Yeah. Much easier.
So some Japanese people do their commas after every 4, which makes it less confusing for them. Some Japanese people do it the Western way just because that's kind of become an international standard, just because there's such a, you know, pro-English bias in the world these days. You know, so if you're an English speaker, that's a good thing and a bad thing. I mean, it makes it easier for you to go pretty much anywhere in the world because English works throughout so much of the world. But on the other hand, there are a lot of people who resent the heck out of us because they feel like it's our fault that, you know, our culture is so dominant all over the world, and they're like, what about us? Our culture is good too. Why isn't our culture more prominent?
That's when Americans go, England started it.
Yeah, right, yeah, blame it all on England, it's their fault. Yeah, British Empire, it's really them.
In that case, you should blame the Romans.
We just
Yeah.
copied them.
Right, but, you know, you can go back into history and blame lots of different people for things if you really are looking for somebody to blame, but, you know, there are a lot of people around the world who kind of blame it all on America these days, so.
Even Americans.
Yeah. So, and if you do travel internationally, if you can learn a little bit of that language, it goes a long way toward dispelling this myth of American arrogance. You know, we're not all arrogant and bigoted and anti the rest of the world. So if you can learn some of whatever language it is before you go there, you can help to, you know, show that, hey, some Americans do care about other cultures and other countries, you know.
I mean, the other countries hate us.
Well, you could just
Yeah.
pretend you're Canadian and not have to worry.
Until they look at your passport.
Right,
They won't
yeah,
look at
well,
it.
if you're in a
Mistake.
situation where you don't have to show that, yeah, you can lie, but, you know, I used to have friends who didn't want to have to practice English with people wherever they went, because they were always getting bombarded by people wanting to practice English on them, and they would claim to be French Canadian so that they could get out of it.
It still just strikes me as weird, like you go to Europe or something and like everyone speaks English.
Yeah.
So like if somebody from another country visits America, it's like you're pretty much expected to know English.
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah, yeah, so.
it's like we're expecting them to know English when we go visit, but if somebody comes here, it's like, you don't know English, what are you doing?
Even
Yeah.
though in our constitution it has no official language.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, so, anyway, so let's go ahead and look at some more of these numbers. So I'm just gonna go by which ones are here. So, yon, man, ni, sen, go, hyakuen, right? When it's no higher than man, it's easy, right, to figure it out. Okay, hasen, hyaku, kyujuen, there you go. Okay, so you just deleted the ichi, huh?
I kind of just read the number, I just wrote down the numbers and
Oh,
then
okay,
added
without
the thing
thinking
to
about it, yeah. Yeah, so there is a tendency to just want to put the ichi in there just because it's there. But for whatever reason, for ju, hyaku, and sen, they just don't add the ichi. Even though when you're writing the digit, obviously you have to write the ichi in the digit. Okay. And then, of course, we had our crazy number that I did before. Okay, so let's see if this one works here. So we've got roku sen man. And then this is going to be, instead of ichi sen, it's just going to be sen, san, en. So that was a crazy number. So good job figuring that one out. And you'll notice also that they don't normally put the commas in when it's the kanji number. So. Okay, rokusen nanaju. What's missing? N. Okay, so if it's got the N symbol, then when you do the kanji, you want to have the kanji for N here. And that usually has the hook on that side. Okay, let's do these guys. Okay, so we've got hasen nana man. There you go, hasen nana man N. That was a weird one, right? Okay, Q sen ropyakuman en. Is that right? Is that ropyaku? It looks like ropyaku, but it's actually rokuju. Okay, and again, this is where doing the numbering thing, like I showed you, can be really helpful for making sure you've got it, checking your work. So you do the ichi. Ju, hyaku, right? Sen, man, and then ju again, hyaku again, sen again. So then you can see very clearly, kyu, sen, roku, ju, man, right? Can you see why it's that now? Okay, can everybody see it? Putting that roku there is deceptive because it looks like ropyaku because of where the commas go. But that's not definitive when you're dealing with Japanese, right? Okay, so Q-sen-roku-ju-man. Okay. Yoji, 4 o'clock. What do we call the PM? Gogo. And where do we put it? Before. So gogo, goji. And later, you'll learn the kanji for gogo, but don't worry about it for now. Okay, and they are two separate kanji. This go and this go are not the same kanji as one another. And neither one of them is the same go that means language. This one is literally noon after. And you remember gozen was the AM one? It's noon before. Okay, that's what those kanji are. When we get to them, you'll learn those.
Do you
Okay.
use the same noon character for like lunch? Or is it?
No, they're actually different kanji. The hiru is a different kanji than the go. Good question though. Yeah, so, okay, and then again, 140 yen is technically correct, but it's not the way Japanese people normally say it. You would just leave this part off and say 140 yen. Okay, and here we have 251 yen. Here, obviously you have to have the ni because otherwise you wouldn't know, right? And the ichi here is necessary because otherwise you're going to be 1 yen short of the cost, right? Okay, so 251 yen. Okay, and we talked about those guys over there. Any questions about how numbers and prices and higher numbers work in Japanese? So now that you've got this trick here, and you've seen how it applies when there's loads of zeros in the number 2, is that helpful? Does everybody feel like they can now figure out any number up to the senman range if they need to? And if you need to go higher than that, it's a new kanji. Okay, and we're not going to mess with that in this course. And the truth is, yeah, even up to senman, I mean, unless you're buying a house or a really expensive sports car or something in Japan, you're never going to need to go any higher than the senmans anyway, right? Those are some really high numbers already. You know, even when you're dealing with yen, which tends to have higher numbers on prices than dollars just because of the exchange rate, right? Still, you don't need to go higher than senman for much of anything, really. So, 質問がありますか? Any questions about numbers? Okay, let's look then at 301 page. 301 page. Okay. Oh, before we talk about this reading, does anyone still have questions about how to write any of the kanji for this chapter? The numbers, G, N, any of that? Are there any concerns about writing the kanji? Okay. So, what we're going to deal with here is some reading. Hi.
It's not to do with like the kanji we're learning per se, but in the vocab,
Hi.
like we could learn the kanji for that, like you were saying, and I was curious for kudu.
Furu kimasu, yeah.
Yeah, would you do, if you were changing that to like kimas, would you just?
You would leave the kanji the same and it just gets read differently.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the
That was-
weirdnesses about kanji in Japanese is that the same individual kanji can have multiple pronunciations, multiple readings, depending on context. And kudu is especially bad that way. Most of the verbs, the piece that's embedded in the kanji at least, it gets pronounced basically the same.
Yeah, all the other ones are like that. So it's like,
But kudu is irregular
okay.
in more ways than one, and it is an exception that's fairly rare. There are a few other verbs out there where there's more than one possible pronunciation of the same kanji, depending on which aspect of the verb you're dealing with, but it's not very common. Usually the part of the verb that's embedded in the kanji is the part that stays the same pronunciation regardless, and the part that trails off the end in hiragana is the part that conjugates. That's 99% of Japanese verbs, but kuru is an exception. Okay? And speaking of exceptions, there are going to be a few alternate readings that come into play in this reading that we're going to do aloud. So who wants to read the first sentence? Hey, Jamie-san, you get to start.
私は毎日7時に起きます。
Hi, which means?
I get up at 7
Right, get up how often?
every day.
Every day at 7 o'clock, right? Okay. Let's see. You want to do the next one? Okay.
うちで朝ごはんを食べます。I eat breakfast at my house.
Right. Okay. うちで朝ごはんを食べます. So notice that she said I, even though there's no watashi wa in the sentence, because it's implied from that first sentence that had watashi wa. Okay? So obviously since it's a watashi wa implied subject, that uchi is my house. Right? Makes sense? Uchi de asa gohan o tabemasu. Okay, Audrey-san, you want to read the next one?
8時に大学へ行きます。
はい。
At 8 o'clock, I go to college.
Exactly. Okay, じゃあ、Corey-san.
9時に日本語を勉強します。
Okay, what's the special pronunciation for 9 o'clock?
Kuji.
Kuji, yeah. So even though that kanji is usually read Q, in the case of this compound, it gets shifted and it's read Kuji, because that's the standard pronunciation for the term 9 o'clock. Okay? So that's an example of what I was talking about, that yes, that's usually read Q, but it can be read Ku, and which one you pick is dependent upon how it's showing up in the text, whether it's part of a compound like kuji that requires the ku reading, or whether it's a part of something like kyuman, which would require the Q reading. Make sense? Okay. Next sentence. Hi, Juliana.
12時半に大学で昼ご飯を食べます。
Hi.
I eat lunch at school at 12:30.
Right, at the college, yes, at 12:30. Okay, notice the han kanji is in there, but it was given the furigana. Does everybody get why? Because we haven't studied that one yet, but it's coming soon. It's one that we're going to be learning soon. You'll notice that there are a lot of other places where they could have put kanji but didn't. Okay, watashi could be kanji. Mainichi is a two kanji compound. The o part of okimasu is a kanji. The uchi is a kanji. Asa and gohan, that's two kanji or three kanji depending on how advanced you want to be. The ta and tabemasu could be a kanji. There could have been dozens more kanji in this paragraph if they wanted to. Why did they only put the han there? Because what they're doing is this is like what they call a graded reader kind of paragraph. They're scaling it back to make it more accessible to students at your level. So they're giving it to you in a form that's more accessible and less intimidating by giving you the kanji that you have learned, that you're responsible for, and just a little bit beyond with the furigana, so that you can get used to seeing one that is coming in the next chapter. Okay? If they were to do this for native Japanese speakers who were adults, it would have been lots more kanji, lot less hiragana to look at. It would have taken up about half as much space because of how much the kanji would have condensed the paragraph. But it would have been a lot more intimidating looking for learners. So this is something that Japanese text does. They grade it based on who the target audience is. So elementary school reading books, for example, have a lot more hiragana and a lot fewer kanji. And then as you go up in the grade levels, you start seeing more kanji every year. You know, you look at a first grade reader, there's a few dozen kanji in use. You look at a second grade reader, it's about twice as many kanji. You look at a third grade reader, there's a lot more kanji than that. And you look at something aimed at adults, and it seems like, 2/3 of it is in kanji. So, who hasn't read yet that wants to? Tell-san.
時々コーヒーを飲みます。
Right?
I sometimes drink coffee.
Right. Okay. The next one, Daphne-san?
4時に図書館で本を読みます。
Hi. Notice she read yoji because that's the standard pronunciation for 4 o'clock. So even though that kanji could be read yon or she correctly chose yo as the reading in this particular case. Does that make sense, everybody? Okay. The next line, who hasn't read yet? Ken-san.
Okay. Hachiji go to.
Is that hachi?
Or excuse me, Rokuji goro uchi e kairimasu.
Right. Which means?
I return to my house somewhere around 6.
Right, about 6 o'clock.
About 6 o'clock.
Okay. Let's see, Gorando-san?
10時にテレビを見ます。
Yep.
At 10 I watch TV.
Right. And then the last one, Jarrett.
There's 12時
Goro.
Oh, yeah, sorry, goro
Yep.
nemasu.
Hi. Which means
I go to bed at 12.
at about 12, yeah, about 12 o'clock. Goro is about, approximately. Okay. Any questions about that paragraph? Does everybody feel like they understand the grammar structures we're using, how the kanji fits into everything? So, that was a really important thing that I wanted to make sure everybody noticed, that the readings of phrases like fuji and yoji, that it's dependent on, that yoji is always pronounced yoji for 4 o'clock, right? That same yon kanji, when it's part of one of these price tags, is pronounced yon, right? And then if it were part of the word for, say, the month of April, it would be pronounced shi. Shigatsu is April. So depending on the context, that same kanji for the number 4 gets read at least 3 different ways, depending on what's appropriate for that sentence, what version of the kanji you're actually reading.
Would that be the same case for 7?
Yes, shichiji because it's 7 o'clock, whereas if it's nana man, you would read the nana, right? So same kanji, different reading depending on the context and what kanji compound you're looking at. That's an important concept that can feel really alien to non-Japanese speakers first learning to read kanji. You're not reading just a meaning. You're reading a meaning and a standard pronunciation that are joined, they're linked. And the same meaning can have multiple pronunciations, but you have to pick the one that's appropriate for that context. Did anybody do the homework yet of the writing practice where you wrote a paragraph like this? Okay, let's hear it.
私は毎日7時に起きます。7時半にここに起きます。行きます。
高校に行きます。はい。高校なここ、right?
12時に高校で昼ご飯を食べます。
はい。
3時半ごろうちで行きます。
うちへ帰ります。うちへ帰ります。Because you're returning to your home where you belong, right? So instead of 行きます, use 帰ります there.
11時に寝ます。
はい、いいですね。That's a good example of using this as a template and writing your own little paragraph. And that's something that I want everybody to do as one of their homework pieces. Okay? Anybody else already do it, or anybody feel like doing it on the fly? Hi.
I'm working on it. 私は8時頃起きます。
はい。
タイでうちで朝がご飯を食べます。
はい。
10時頃大学へ行きます。
はい。
12頃図書館で
12時頃
12時頃図書館で勉強します。
はい。
午後5時頃うちへ帰ります。
はい。
Trying to make it same amount of sentences.
That's okay. It doesn't have to be the same length necessarily.
11時頃寝ます。
はい、いいですね。And of course, you can alter what you put in depending on what you want to say. So you could add in, if there's a sport or other activity that you frequently do, you could add in something like yoku tennis o shimasu, or whatever else you might want to put in. Okay, Jared, question? Or?
Oh, no, I thought we were all going through it.
Okay, if you want to. A lot of people didn't necessarily prepare anything yet, so we weren't necessarily going to make everybody do it.
I haven't done yet.
All right, then.
What's that? Oh, you don't want to after all?
Now I'm actually thinking I did it wrong, so.
Oh. But does everybody feel like they understand how to do it? You can use this as a template. You can.
Oh, wait, no, I have it. Okay,
You
I'm sorry.
do have
Can I
it?
do
Okay. Okay. And then Corey had a question, or Corey wants
Question.
to? Okay. You want to ask your question first, and then we'll let Jared do it.
Yeah, how would you say every Saturday?
Ah, very good. So you guys know Saturday, right? Saturday is 土曜日, right? 土曜日. Okay. You know every day is mainichi, right? Maishu is every week. We haven't learned this yet, but you could say Maishu no doyobi would be every Saturday, every week's Saturday. Okay, so that's one way you can do it. Some people might make a compound mai doyobi. Yeah, I'm not sure if that's like standard or if that's just something that some people sort of make without it. There's certain ones, there's certain compounds like that that are sort of in process, like they weren't standard in the past, but people are starting to use them and they're starting to become more accepted. But I think that's one of those that might be still sort of a transition word. Maishu no doyobi is correct. Mai doyobi is one of those that might be, some people might accept it and some people might think it sounds weird.
So it's kind of slang.
It's kind of slangy, it's kind of like in progress, if that makes sense.
Certainly using short form.
Yeah, I would say that's more of a, maybe not to be used in a formal essay, but maybe used in your text message to your friend,
Achiji ni okimasu. Achiji hon ni asagohan o tabemasu.
Okay.
Kyoji ni,
Kuji ni.
sorry, every time I
Yeah,
get that.
that's okay.
Kuji ni gaku ni ikimasu.
Gakko ni ikimasu, right?
Yeah, gaku ni ikimasu.
Gakko.
Juichiji ni iru gohan. I'm bad at reading it. Like I can write it down easily. Juichiji ni iru gohan o tabemasu.
Right?
Gogo shichiji ni uchi ni kaimasu.
Right?
And then gogo juichiji ni nemasu.
はい、いいですね。Okay. Do we have anyone else who wants to read theirs before we go on to the next activity?
I have a question.
はい。
What is the word for art?
It depends on the context.
Like, to do art, like, I guess to draw would be better.
Okay, well, o kakimasu would be to, like, draw pictures. So if that's what you mean specifically, I would say go with o kakimasu.
What is okakimasu?
O kakimasu. Is a picture, particle o, and then the verb kaku is to write and or draw, and it can actually be written with two different kanji, depending on whether you mean writing or drawing. So el kaku is to draw pictures. And it can encompass painting as well, and again, it definitely would use the kanji that implies artistic painting as opposed to written word for that version. So el kaku, and this is an u verb, so it conjugates to kakimasu. Okay.
Thank you.
Hi. Okay. Did anybody else want to read their paragraph, or should we move on to the next activity? We ready to move on? Okay. So, is everybody good on how to write G? That's the most complex kanji we have thus far. So, is everybody conscious of using sun, soil, inch, the three components, to write it? And does everybody see how knowing the correct stroke order of the three individual components gives you the correct stroke order of the whole character? And it also gives you the order, because you do left to right, top to bottom. So you've got 1, 2, 3 as far as knowing what part to write when. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay.
Which is the stroke order for the soil?
The soil one is
Horizontal.
1, 2, 3. So 1, 2, 3, like that. 1, 2, 3. So it's this horizontal, then the vertical, then the bottom. Okay? And one of the neat things about knowing that is you can decipher that kind of crazy handwriting because, well, think about it. This might look like total gibberish, but if you know stroke order, you can follow. Okay, they did that, then that, then that, then that. Can you see it? Can you see the order, sort of?
I can see is the inch.
Okay.
I can kind of see sun and
Yeah.
soil, but inch is harder to see.
Yeah. Well, and if I do it
I see it.
a little bit more separated, you can see it a little better, right? But can you see where, if you know your stroke order, you've at least got some hope of reading something like that. If somebody's handwriting is this bad, you've got some hope if you've been learning it with the correct stroke order. Also, you've got your muscle memory, right? How many people have learned how to ride a bicycle? How many people have had the experience of not riding it for a really long time and then getting back on and finding that, yeah, they were a little rusty, but they picked it up again pretty easily? Have you ever had that experience?
Nope, never lost it.
Okay. Never lost it in the first place? Never learned in the first place. Can you think of something else physical that you have learned where you might have had a break, not done it for a while, and then gone back to it and found that you could pick it up again fairly easily? That's called muscle memory. You get the same thing if you consistently write your hiragana, your katakana, and your kanji with appropriate stroke order rules. If you follow the same basic rules all the time and you always write your that order, if you always write your ji this order, you get muscle memory for those symbols to the point where it becomes easier to remember how to write it when the time comes to actually write it down. You'll see me sometimes where, somebody asks me, what's the stroke order for that? And I actually have to write it first. And then I can remember and tell you what the stroke order is. Because it's so embedded in my muscle memory that I remember first how I write it. And then I can tell you, oh, okay, it's 1, 2, 3. But I can remember it better by writing it than I can by trying to look at it and tell you, oh, it's this stroke, then that stroke, then the other stroke. Do you see what I'm saying? Muscle memory helps you so much. And then when you do encounter somebody with crazy handwriting like this, you've got some hope of figuring out what they wrote because you can follow the line of how their pen moved and try to decipher what that squiggle must be, right? So that when, for example, I got that on a letter from a former teacher, you can't really see all of it because I wrote it on top of something else, but it looked like that.
So they had a stroke.
God.
Can you see it?
I did
Sort
see,
of?
I didn't see ash, but I didn't see ta at all.
Yeah.
Alyssa was.
Isn't that crazy? But because I knew the stroke order and I knew enough vocabulary and grammar, I could decipher from the context, oh, that has to be a ta. As crazy as that looks, that has to be ta because nothing else fits in that spot. Okay? Because it was in the context of a whole postcard. So when I was able to read other parts of her letter that were not quite so illegible, so I was able to figure that out. But that's pretty crazy, right? I mean, her she was basically a straight line.
Tiny, like,
Hook.
Yeah, tiny little bit of you know. So, but that's part of the reason I keep coming back to stroke order and components. You know, if somebody's name, for example, is that, and they write it,
That's a literal signature.
yeah. At least if you've seen this before, you have some hope, right?
Yeah, that's it.
So, yeah, that's Honda, by the way, as in the car company.
Is bad handwriting like that common?
Bad handwriting like that is probably not quite as common as it is in English, but I mean, how many people have known a doctor? How many people have attempted to read their handwriting? You know, knowing how English is normally written helps, whether you're conscious of it or not. Knowing that when you write an A in cursive, you normally do it in that order, helps you decipher when somebody's got crazy handwriting, right? So the same thing is true of Japanese. Now, if you ask somebody, hey, how do you write your name in kanji? And they write it down for you, if you're lucky, if they're conscious of the fact that you're a gaijin, they'll probably print it fairly neatly. But they're not necessarily going to print like this. Honda. You know, they might do that and think that's neat enough.
Enough.
That's,
fair.
you know, that's
That's fair.
fair, you know. It's better than that, right?
That's for like credit cards.
But, you know, this is like full-on cursive. This is sort of messy print / semi-neat cursive. This is really print, right? But any of three of those are possibilities, you know? So it helps if you know your stroke order, you've got a better chance of deciphering that or that, right? If you're aware of stroke order and you've learned your characters with stroke order. If you have never heard of the right stroke order before, you really have no hope of deciphering those guys, right? So the other thing I wanted us to work on tonight is if we look at 101 page.
Do we have a test this Thursday?
Yes, Thursday is the chapter test.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yes, we are almost done with chapter 3.
We need to sign up or reserve a train.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh, that's right, you weren't here when I was passing that around. So there weren't a lot of slots left, so we put you guys down for 1:45. Does that work in your
That
schedule?
works for me.
Yeah, I usually get out early in the class, so I'm fine. Yeah.
Okay. If you need to swap places with somebody,
You might have to drive yourself.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
yeah.
Because I get out of my class at 1:30.
Yeah, you want to just pass this around and let everybody see when they're scheduled for, we might need to be reminded. Okay. So yes, we have our chapter test. This activity that I want to do next is actually preparation for the OPI. Okay, so here's some OPI practice right here and now. Okay?
Time to cry. Let's do
Yeah,
this.
same.
So, if you're looking at 101page,
Jakuichi?
101, right? You see the dialogue there?
Okay.
This is a model for one of the parts of the OPI, which is going to be one person suggesting an activity together and the other person basically saying, that doesn't work for me, and then the first person making a second suggestion and the second person saying, yeah, that's good, or something along those lines, right? And then you'll swap roles, and the other person will make the suggestion, and the first person will reply. So you're going to get practice doing both the A role and the B role as shown here. This is just a template. This is a model. What I want us to all do is actually practice this model, and then the other type that we're going to have is where you're going to ask things like questions with itsu or doko or nanji or nani. Those kinds of question words, and the other person answer. On also frequency, like yoku. So for example, itsu, and then some activity, like itsu tennis o shimasu ka, when do you play tennis? Or itsu bangohan o tabemasu ka, when do you eat dinner? Doko could be, for example, doko de hon o yomimasu ka, where do you read books? Or doko de benkyou shimasu ka, where do you study? Right? And answers could be like uchi de benkyou shimasu or toshokan de benkyou shimasu, right? Nanji ni nemasu ka? Nanji ni okimasu ka? Nanji ni tabemasu ka? Right? You can, what time do you do all kinds of different activities? This G, by the way, non-G, it's actually this G. So we should use the kanji for it. Nani o shimasu ka? So for example, doyobi ni nani o shimasu ka? What do you do on Saturdays? You know?
What is the word for scream? Just screaming. Just
Scream?
yeah, like that's my answer. Is I'm gonna figure out how to say it.
We haven't learned that one yet, so I don't really want us to throw a lot of new vocabulary into this. I want us to use what we're studying thus far.
That's what tells truth, you know. What are you doing this Saturday?
Yeah.
Screaming.
What about like, doyobi ni nani o shimasu ka? Nemasu. You know?
That's true.
Yeah, that might be true for a lot of people here, right? Or benkyou shimasu. Or terebi game o shimasu. Okay, and then yoku could be in things like yoku sushi o tabemasu ka? Do you often eat sushi? You know, or yoku nemasu ka? Do you sleep a lot? You know, yoku terebi game o shimasu ka? Do you play a lot of video games? Right?
Do you have like nani in front of it to make it like half or like some, I don't know.
You could say nani o yoku shimasu ka? What do you often do? And then the person could answer with something like yoku terebi game o shimasu. I often play video games. Or taitei hon o yobimasu. I usually read books. Or you know, tokidoki hamburger o tabemasu. Sometimes I eat hamburgers. You know, whatever you want to answer with. But there's basically just going to be two parts to this OPI. One is going to be asking and answering questions like this, and it can be any random question you want to form, and the other person just has to answer it. Okay? And it won't be long dialogues in this case unless you can think of some follow-up. You know, so if you ask them, nani o yoku shimasu ka? What do you often do? And they say, tokidoki hamburger o tabemasu. I sometimes eat hamburgers. And you can think of a follow-up question to that to kind of keep it going on that thread. You can. But if you can't come up with anything, you can just change gears and ask a different question. Or let them ask a question. So that's going to be the one part. And then the other part is going to be a little mini dialogue like this, where you ask somebody if they like to do a particular activity, like terebi game o shimasu ka? Do you play video games? And they say, hai, shimasu. Yes, I do. And then you ask like, doyobi ni terebi game o shimasen ka? Hey, you want to play video games together on Saturday? And they say, doyobi wa chotto. you know, and then you answer with something like, じゃあ、日曜日はどうですか? How about Sunday? あ、いいですね. Okay, something like that.
With yoku, does that also imply like how often? Or is that, do you have like another word to it?
Yeah. Do you often do X? It's kind of that structure. So it's not asking how frequently, but it's kind of implying that because it's asking, do you often do this? And then you can answer with, はい、よくします. Yes, I often do it. Or you can answer with はい and a different frequency. 時々します. Sometimes I do it. Or you can say, いえ、あんまりしません. No, I don't do it that often. Or いえ、全然しません. No, I never do that. Okay, so you can answer with any of the frequency adverbs we've studied in the answer. And whether you use はい or いえto start your answer is going to depend on how frequent you're saying. So if it's sometimes or more, you're going to use はい and then your frequency adverb and a positive verb ending, right? So はい、時々します. はい、よくします. はい、拝見します. If it's a negative answer, it's going to be like いえ、あまりしません. No, I don't do it very much. Or いえ、全然しません. No, I never do that. Don't do that at all. Okay? So, for example, if the question was, テレビゲームをしますか? Some of you are going to say, はい、よくします. I would say, いえ、全然しません. Okay? Make sense? Okay, somebody else had a hand up. Hi.
When creating a masenka type question, if you were to also address the person in it, would you rephrase it as blah 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 san wa something masenka to?
You can.
Okay.
Yeah, there are two options for that. So let's use that. So, okay. Since you brought it up, I'm going to use your name. So, let's see. Do you use Odori? Odori-san? Does that work? Okay. So, here's two alternatives. Odori-san wa yoku, let's see, 本を読みますか? Are we doing the invitation or are we doing the question word?
The invitation. Like to
Okay.
address someone and
Okay,
invite them at the
so
same time.
yeah. So let's change it because honoyomimasu ka sounds like a weird thing to invite someone to go do together. Right? So Odori-san wa, let's see, 土曜日にテニスをしますか? Or しませんか? テニスをしませんか? Okay, so you want to invite Audrey to do tennis together on Saturday. That's one way. The other way would be, comma, Audrey-san, 土曜日にテニスをしませんか? Okay, so you don't have to do the wa. You can do it as just, hey, person's name. You want to do this?
How would you add like a place that adding all the things? Do you want on Saturday to go to the cafe to drink coffee?
Okay, so, okay. Do you want to change this to drinking coffee or keep it as tennis for now? Just
Yeah, I just don't know a place that we don't know
Okay.
where for a place to.
yeah, we don't have a good place for tennis. So okay, so 土曜日に you can leave that as is, right? Place would be 喫茶店で, right? 喫茶店で. Okay, and then オードリーさん、土曜日に喫茶店でコーヒー, right? コーヒーを飲みませんか? Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so does that, whoa,
Oh, careful.
does that kind of fulfill what you're asking for? So yeah, so you can do any person's name with san, and then a pause, a comma, in writing a pause in your voice, right? And then time frame, ni, location, de, and then object, o, verb. And do the masenka form if it's an invitation, right? If you're doing this as a do you frequently do this activity instead of an invitation, your verb ending is going to change to the positive, right? And instead of, or in addition to the time phrase, you might also have a frequency adverb in there. So if you're changing it over, we can use the same structure, but instead of masenka, it would change to maska, right? And doyobi ni kisaten de, and then yoku could be added here or here. So, for example, you could just yoku right there. Yoku doyobi ni kisaten de kohi o nomimasu ka? So you could ask Audrey, hey, do you often drink coffee at a coffee shop on Saturdays? Right? Because that's something that somebody may or may not frequently do. Right? Maybe she goes to Starbucks every Saturday to drink coffee. Who knows? You know?
Expensive.
Yeah. But possible. If she's got the money. Hi.
Do you use particles with doko?
Doko, yes. Doko de.
Is it always, I mean, could you use it like, where do you go?
Yeah, oh, there you go. Doko ni would be the other option. Doko ni or e are options there. So, doko ni ikimasu ka?
So you
Doko
pretty much
e
just-
ikimasu ka?
Sorry.
Yeah.
You're pretty much just like using doko in place of a verb, practically.
Doko
I mean,
would be
a-
in
a
place of a
noun.
location, yeah.
Just gonna use a noun.
So wherever a location word fits, you can put doko in its place. So like doko de kohi o nomimasu ka? Where do you generally drink your coffee? Maybe it's not kisaten de, maybe it's uchi de, right? Maybe it's tomodachi no uchi de, right? At your friend's house, right? So you could change that up. Yoku doyobi ni doko de kohi o nomimasu ka? Where do you often drink coffee on Saturdays? And Audrey's answer could be tomodachi no uchi de kohi o nomimasu. Right? She drinks coffee at her friend's house because Starbucks is way too expensive. Right?
If you were to change the sentence back into an invitation, and you wanted to put in like a specific time,
Yeah.
where would you place that at?
Ah, so let's say you wanted to get rid of the yoku, right? Change this back to masenka, and you wanted to give it a, not just doyobi, but also a time.
Right.
So like a time on Saturday.
Yeah.
So doyobi no, for example, yoji ni kisaten de kohi o nomimasen ka? So at 4 o'clock on Saturday at the kisaten,
Okay.
you want to drink some coffee? And then, of course, in the person's reply, if doyobi is good for them, but yoji is not good, they could say yoji wa chotto. And then you could say, ja, sanji wa, what about 3 o'clock? Would that work better for you? You know, or if 4 p.m. is a good time for them, but doyobi is not great, doyobi wa chotto. And then you could say, ja, nichiyobi wa, how about Sunday instead? Or maybe 4 o'clock on Saturday is great, but kisaten is too expensive. So, kisaten wa chotto. And then you can say, ja, watashi no uchi ni kimasen ka? In that case, you want to come to my house? You know, you could invite them over instead. You see how you can keep changing things around little by little. Hi.
How would you respond to the suggestion, like maybe Saturday?
Okay, so let's say somebody says, 土曜日の4時に喫茶店でコーヒーを飲みませんか? Let's say you don't like Saturday, but you'd rather do it on Sunday. You could say, 土曜日はちょっと、日曜日はどうですか? How about Sunday? どうですか is like, how is it? Right? Did we have that already? どうですか? I think that was this chapter, right? はい。
How do you say like, where do you want to eat?
Ah, there you go. Back to your doko again. Doko de tabemasu ka? That's like, where shall we eat?
Would it not be tabemasen ka?
In this case, because it's not a yes-no question, the tabemasen sounds weird.
Okay.
So, like, if, let's say you're making the suggestion, let's say it's the two of you having the conversation. So you say, 土曜日に食べませんか? And he answers, いいですね。どこで食べますか? Where are we going to eat? So you suggested, let's eat together on Saturday. He said, okay, that sounds good. Now he can say, どこで食べますか? Where should we eat? And then you can suggest, マコダで食べませんか? You want to eat at McDonald's? Not really. Whatever. You know, but you see how that can work? And again, we're working with very limited scope here. I'm trying not to introduce anything different that comes up in a later chapter because I want you to just use what we've learned thus far. There are other ways to suggest a place or to ask where should we do X. But for now, I want you to just keep it to what we've learned in this chapter, right?
On the past two written tests, we've had to do the hiragana and katakana charts. Are we
Right.
gonna have to do
We're not
that?
going to have charts again
Okay.
on this chapter. I'm hoping that you guys have them by now.
Okay.
One thing that's going to be different is, remember on the last chapter test, we had a listening portion that was just hiragana, and you just had to, like, if I said ne, you had to write ne in hiragana and katakana, and that was it. This time, that piece of the listening part is actually going to be a kanji section. So it might be something like yoji, and you have to write out the kanji for yoji for 4 o'clock. Or it might be kyuman hassen en desu, and you have to write out kyuman hassen en desu. And so the desu would be in hiragana, all the rest of that would be kanji, right?
Are you gonna make us write like the kanji into like the Western numbers? And if we do that, can we have like the 4-point commas? Like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, if I don't remember if there's anything where I give you the kanji and you write the digits. I think I only have the other way around. But if there were, yes, you can put the commas either way, 3 or 4, wherever works for you. Okay, and that's true going forward too. And if you prefer the 4-place commas because it's easier to keep it straight in your own head, feel free.
I feel like that's just how it works.
It just works better for Japanese that way, yeah. Japanese, Chinese, Korean, and I believe Vietnamese also, all use basically the same numbering system, all coming from Chinese origin. They all borrowed the Chinese numbers, and the way they structure their language and their vocabulary words around numbers are all based off of Chinese. They all use those common roots. And so, yeah, all of those 4 East Asian countries and languages do their numbers basically the same.
The good
Yeah.
thing about Viet numbers and Viet in
Yeah.
general is that they don't use characters.
Right, they use a Romanized alphabet now, but in ancient Vietnam, they used to write in Chinese characters. Yeah, and then they got westernized by,
Changed and stuff. so
Yeah.
that's obvious.
yeah, they did their own pronunciations, but actually there's a fair bit of common ground between, especially Vietnamese and Cantonese, in terms of how certain words are pronounced. Yeah, I had some Vietnamese classmates when I first started taking Chinese, and they kept exclaiming over, oh wow, that sounds almost like our word for that, you know? Hi.
Will we be expected to know any of the kanji radicals?
The radicals aren't actually on this test. I introduced them because I really want you to have that foundation. But I chose not to include them on the test just because there's so much in this chapter.
True.
So at this point, for me, for this chapter, the only radicals you really need to know are those guys, because they're the only ones that actually come up in this chapter, right? But then going forward, other ones are going to come up, because next chapter, you're going to get this one in both of its forms.
That's, eat.
Yeah, to eat, yeah. The taberu, it comes up in next chapter, and then this version is going to be in nomu, which I think it gets introduced as one to look at, but not one you have to write until later. But it's also it's the Han and Gohan has this on it, and a bunch of other characters that have to do with eating and ingesting nutrition have that in there somewhere. And then, you know, going forward, there are just so many other places where those radicals come into play. So I wanted you to have that grounding, but for now, these three are the only ones that are actually used in a kanji that you're learning. But then, like next chapter, our crazy little short-tailed bird comes into play, right? And a bunch of the other ones, because we're going to learn the kanji for all the days of the week in chapter 4. So you're going to have sun and moon and fire and water and wood and metal and soil. Yeah, all the 5 Chinese elements are there. And then you're also going to have short-tailed bird, because the yo in doyobi, nichiyobi, and all the other days of the week includes this as part of a more complex calendar. So knowing this makes that so much easier to learn, because the whole kanji looks like this. So you've got sun, katakana yo twice, and short-tailed bird.
On Sunday?
That's the yo in nichiyobi, doyobi, and all the other days of the week. This is the yo part of all 7 days of the week. So if you've already got short-tailed bird memorized, and you've already got sun memorized from over here, then all you have to remember is the katakana yo twice.
And that's the part that that is variable between days.
Yeah, every day of the week is something or other, yo, and then beat is the sun character again. So nichiyobi, doyobi, kayobi, tsuyobi, all of them are something or other yobi. This is these.
But the kanjis for them are all going to be the same.
The
except for that
kanji,
top part.
yeah, it's going to be, every day of the week is a 3 kanji compound. The first one is the only one that varies. The other 2 are the same all 7 times.
Right.
So it makes your life much easier if you already know short-tailed bird, because that's 1/3 of this kanji, and it's the most complex part.
Wait, which one is the one that varies? The sun?
This first one is the only one that varies.
Oh.
So like do-yobi is the soil one you already know.
Yeah.
Nichi-yobi is the sun one you already know. It's literally Sunday. Yeah. So soil day, Sunday for the weekend, and then you get moon day, fire day, water day, wood day,
Avatar.
golden day.
It's Thursday?
Friday.
Oh.
Yeah, golden day, you know,
Makes
kin,
sense.
the one that's metal and or gold, those are all radicals that we've already learned. So next chapter is going to be a good time to go back and revisit those radicals, because a bunch of them that we're not using in lesson 3 get used in lesson 4. And then you'll want to revisit that list again in lesson 5 because some different ones come up. And then in lesson 6, some different ones come up, and so on and so forth for the rest of your life. Because those are 40 of the most commonly used radicals. And they all exist in multiple vocabulary words that will come up eventually as you continue to learn more Japanese. So we kind of got off on a tangent and didn't get a chance to practice our kaiwa, but everybody has an idea of what to practice, right? So you can, get with your friends in the lab and do sample dialogues based off of this one. You can base some off of the ones that are at the beginning of your chapter. That's kind of what they're there for. So you can take these as templates and swap out some of the vocabulary words and do some different versions. So instead of like, Mary-san, 週末は大抵何をしますか? She says, そうですね、大抵うちで勉強します. You could swap that out and say, 大抵うちでテレビゲームをします. Or 大抵学校で本を読みます. Or whatever you want to put in, right? So you can take structures like these two dialogues and this dialogue on page 101 and practice. And definitely talk with friends if you already know ahead of time, if you remember who your partner is going to be and you want to hang out with that person and practice, you could, practice some of the random crazy sentences you want to ask them and practice knowing how to answer each other. So if the other person wants to ask you, 何時に寝ますか? You can be ready because you practiced. 私は大抵10時に寝ます. Whatever you want to say, right? So that's the cool thing about the OPI is the whole point of it is to get better at speaking, right? So if you guys want to practice this stuff ahead of time, I'm telling you up front, this is what I want you to be able to do. Ask and answer questions about when, where, how often, and what you guys do on a regular basis, right? And be able to invite each other to do activities together and accept and reject those invitations. Okay? If you can come in ready to do that, you should do great on the OPI. And those are skills that you want to have anyway, right? Because eventually you're all hopefully going to get to Japan someday and want to be able to talk about this stuff with your Japanese friends, right? And that's kind of the point, right? If you weren't serious about wanting to learn Japanese, you probably would have picked a different language, right? You could have picked an easier one than this, right? So if you're in here, it's probably because you want to actually use this someday in real life. At least that's what I guess. So, any other questions about any of it? Okay, that's it. So, Thursday, OPIs and written tests.